Hand position. I talked about hand position a little bit in the previous video, but now I'm going to talk about hand position more generally, so this will apply to all of the pieces in the rest of this course, and also any piece you play outside of this course. Now, of course, your hand position is going to be a little different depending on what you're playing, but I think there are a few general rules that are worth bearing in mind no matter what piece you're playing. Now, almost all beginner piano courses start by teaching you lots of pieces that only use the white notes for a long time. So maybe for, several weeks or even a couple of months. And that's because almost all courses, when teaching you piano for the first time, are teaching you how to read music at the same time as teaching you how to play the piano. And the white notes just happen to be easier to read on paper than the black notes. Now, as you know, I think that teaching you how to read music at the same time as teaching you how to play the piano is not a great idea. I think it's good just to start you playing piano and then teach you how to read music afterwards. After all, you learn to speak before you could read. And the other problem with getting you to play lots of pieces on white notes for ages is that you can get away with just hitting the white notes right at the edge of the keys like this. And if you do that, you'll find that your wrist will probably naturally fall below the level of the keys. You probably can't see that on this video, but if you just put your 5 fingers on any 5 notes in a row and hit the notes right at the edge like this, you'll find that your wrist will naturally fall quite far down, because it's not a very natural thing to do. So if you look at it from the side, you get this kind of thing, where there's this bend at your wrist. However, the first rule I want you to bear in mind for hand position is that your wrist should be above the level of the keys. So that means that the back of your hand and your forearm should all be in a straight line. So that is rule number 1 when it comes to hand position, is that always make sure that your wrist is raised above the level of the keys so that the back of your hand and your forearm make a straight line. Now, we're going to cover the other 2 rules in a moment when I show you an exercise that Chopin used to do with his students. So this exercise has a really good lineage. And we'll start with the right hand and then we'll do it in the left hand. So with your right hand, take your 3 middle fingers and place them on the 3 black notes. I'm choosing the 3 black notes just to the right of the center, but you could take any 3, whatever's most comfortable. And you're going to hit those notes kind of near the edge of the black keys. And then just let your thumb and 5th finger fall on the white notes either side, so on E and C. And this kind of brings us to our second rule, which is that you'll notice when you do that your thumb is hitting the key at the edge, but these 3 fingers are further forward than your thumb, and then your little finger's kind of in between the 2. Everyone's hand is different, of course, but I think for pretty well everyone, your thumb is going to be shorter than your 3 middle fingers, and for most people, I think your 5th finger is going to be quite a bit shorter than your 4th finger. And that means in piano playing, you should usually be hitting keys away from the edge of the key. So the opposite of what I was saying just then. If you're playing notes right at the edge of the white notes, then it's quite artificial and it forces you to move your wrist down. Whereas if you actually move your fingers forward, because the middle ones are longer, then you can move your wrist up and you have a healthier hand position. So that is point number 2. With the exception of your thumb, you should usually play a key away from the edge of the keyboard. Now, this happens naturally if you play pieces with black notes in them. It's another disadvantage of learning pieces on white notes only for a long time, is that when you finally do start playing black notes, you realize that you have to change your hand position, move your fingers forward, and that's quite a big change. So you'll notice that in this course, I've been getting you to play black notes right from the start. We had one in Imagine, we went through that note, we just had a black note in When the Saints, and we're also going to have a tune on black notes only, Amazing Grace, when we get there. And all of this will show you that black notes aren't scary. Lots of people associate black notes with difficulty because they're harder to read, but I think they're actually easier to play. So you shouldn't be intimidated by playing on lots of black notes. And also, by getting you to play black notes right from the start, I'm helping you to have a good hand position right from the start of your piano playing career. So that was point number 2. Generally play most notes unless it's with your thumb away from the edge of the keys. Point number 1, remember, was have your wrist above the level of the keys. And now point number 3, which again is slightly hard to see on video, is that you should have your fingers slightly curved. So if I rotate my hand, you can see that there's a certain amount of space underneath it between my hand and the keyboard. So I read somewhere the suggestion that you should imagine that you could fit a small mouse under your hand. If you're terrified of mice, that's not a great thing to imagine, I guess. You can imagine a small bird or something, or I don't know, an Oreo. But there should be a bit of space between your hand and the keyboard. So if your fingers are flat and you play the keys, then you'll find that there's no space underneath your fingers between your fingers and the white notes here. Whereas if you just curve your fingers a bit, that's a much more flexible hand position and there'll be some space underneath your hand. You don't want to curve your fingers too much. You shouldn't be playing notes with your fingernails because your fingernails are slippery, you get less control. You want to make sure that you're playing notes with the pads of your fingers, but not so flat that there's no space under your hand. So keep those 3 things in mind when playing any piece. Point number 1 is that you don't want to have a bend at your wrist. You want your wrist to be above the level of the keys so that you have a flat back of hand and forearm. Point number 2 is that you usually want to play most notes away from the edge of the keyboard, which is automatic if you're playing on black notes because the black notes are further forward. But even if you're just playing 5 white notes, you want to make sure that you're hitting any notes with these longer fingers away from the edge. And then point number 3 is that you want your fingers to be a little bit curved when playing the keyboard.